this week kind of folds into the story of the year in Washington, which is how you develop and bring along a young quarterback. And Bryce Young's benching gets a lot of attention, and rightfully so, because he's a #1 overall pick who has now been benched 2 games into and going into week 3 of his rookie season. Clearly, the atmosphere, the kind of things that you need to incubate and insulate and ultimately develop a young quarterback were not there in Carolina. Meanwhile, you look at the approach that Chicago's taken with Caleb and the approach that Washington's taken with Jayden, and I think they're very different approaches. When you try to parse out what is worth doing with a young quarterback early, what is not, like what are kind of your no-fly zones, like how do you start to think about situationally developing a young quarterback and what works and what doesn't?
Yeah, it certainly just kind of depends on what the situation is going to be and what kind of environment you are putting that quarterback in. And I think the thing for Bryce Young, which it just kind of turned out, was there was really no set trait that he was able to lean on to get him through some of the tougher times. And when he kind of came out of the draft, you kind of hoped you were banking on some of the creativity he had, some of the accuracy. But as the game kind of sped up for him at the NFL level, those things just, one, weren't NFL caliber and certainly weren't plus traits that were going to be able to kind of bring him forward. So that's kind of one of the hard things. And when you're going on, an outlier like he was in terms of, size, he kind of needed one of those things to really break through in order for, especially in the situation they had in Carolina, to kind of make up for the lack of talent they had. But you see, Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels, I think both of those guys right now do have some kind of skill. Caleb, I think it's still his creation. He's still very good at the line of scrimmage, and he's not getting helped out a lot by the supporting cast, the interior offensive line specifically. But I still think that's going to allow him to be able to develop while he's playing. I think Jayden Daniels right now, he has his legs, which is just something that he's going to be able to make plays happen and not make plays worse when they're still kind of figuring out what this passing offense is going to be. So I think when you just kind of have these younger quarterbacks, you just kind of have to know they have something right now where when the speed of the game is a little too much, what they're falling back on is not going to be a detriment to what they're doing. And I think we saw it definitely was with Bryce Young, but I think Caleb and Jayden and some of these other younger quarterbacks, we do see that they have something that's going to, allow them to keep their head above water.
Yeah, it is the kind of thing where you just need to have some kind of floor. And for Jayden, the floor is built in. He can scramble, and he can get out of dodge. And for Caleb, there's the creativity. Although, obviously he hasn't had exactly a stellar 2 first games this season. So perhaps there is, I think that they maybe have put too much on Caleb's plate in Chicago. And that goes all the way back to how they've kind of handled the job of they just handed everything to him, didn't necessarily have a bunch of veterans around. It's kind of like, hey, dude, we saw it on Hard Knocks. Like, I don't know how many head coaches around the league are meeting with their quarterbacks, especially their young quarterbacks, one-on-one multiple times throughout training camp, where here it was like, hey, dude, you're going to have to beat out Marcus Mariota. Wasn't exactly the world's greatest challenge, but Jayden had to actually go through that process. With Young, like, how do you think it got beyond, I guess, the obvious, which, sorry to take the obvious off the table, of the talent around him wasn't good. How did it get this bad where he almost feels like ruined and unsalvageable already, and we're not even, a quarter into his second season?
Yeah, it was just one of those things where because he was such this outlier, he was a small and skinny quarterback. And it's a thing where we have seen those kinds of guys work in the past, but you have a Kyler Murray who just has just unbelievable agility and has a huge arm. Same thing was going with Russell Wilson back when he came in Seattle. Smaller quarterback, but thicker, still able to move, had one of the strongest arms in the league. Like, he's still, right now, when he cannot move, still has one of the prettiest deep balls when it is working, at least from the last thing we saw when he was playing last year. That was kind of the one thing that was working a little bit. But with Bryce Young, there was just no physical trait that ended up being something that he could lean on when things were going wrong. The accuracy wasn't there. The creativity that he was able to do at Alabama. At Alabama, he was able to kind of scramble. It always seemed like he was a step ahead of the defense. He kind of knew where to go. And those things just weren't happening in Carolina. So when there weren't easy answers built into the offense, he didn't have anything that he could lean on, just on his own to be able to make something happen. And I think as that continued to progress last year, he got less and less confident in trying to create for himself. And then it really just ended up being a lot of panic in the pocket. And that's how just things kind of started to snowball a little bit. And they did not get better this year. And I think they kind of got worse. And when things started to go wrong, I think they get a little bit worse for him. So whether this is a break that's needed and something he can eventually bounce back from, maybe somewhere else, because it doesn't seem like it's going to be a good situation really in Carolina to continue going forward. But he just kind of needs to reset, I think, and they need to figure out what his fallback on. You kind of need a trump card a little bit, especially when you are, that type of size outlier. He doesn't have the strongest arm. He doesn't have the pinpoint accuracy of like a Tua, who doesn't have the strongest arm, right? There's just no outstanding trait that has showed up so far for him in the NFL, and it's going to be real tough to play quarterback that way.
Show with us every Thursday, and you can read his work, of course, at the 33rd Team. All right, from the really insightful analysis, Dan, to what we really live for in sports radio land: fake trades. If you could fake or trade, not fake trade, if you could real trade Bryce Young somewhere, and especially I think, you mentioned Tua. Miami comes up a lot because we don't know Tua's future. I've seen some wacky 3-team trades with Matthew Stafford going to Miami, going around. Is there any system or family of schemes or somewhere that if you could trade Bryce Young there right now, that in 3 years Bryce Young's a good NFL quarterback, and so I'm even giving you trade him to LA, let him sit behind Stafford. Where would you send Bryce Young if you could wave a magic wand and send Bryce Young somewhere?
Yeah, I mean that would probably be something like that, where you would trade him to a Rams with McVay, or at San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan. Give him the Sam Darnold treatment for a year behind Brock Purdy with Kyle Shanahan, kind of get him in one of those offenses. Yeah, I mean, Miami, it could work again, but I don't think he has, I think what Mike McDaniel has done so good with Tua is really brought his strengths out with that offense. And I think, when that offense was working, when Tua was on the field, his ability to get the ball out quickly played as big of a role in that offense as the speed of the receivers. Everyone was working at the same pace. And I think we've kind of seen when, some other quarterbacks come in Miami, it doesn't work quite as well, especially with that offensive line, because that offensive line is not good right now. So other quarterbacks being behind there who don't have that quick processing, that is going to become a detriment. I'm really interested to kind of see what this Miami offense does look like going forward with a non-Tua quarterback behind there. So I would trust Mike McDaniel to kind of bring him along. I don't think it's necessarily like you think it's a plug and play because they have such great wide receivers. But it would be one of those guys that you kind of just trust to develop a quarterback, whether it be McVay or a Shanahan. But I'm not sure any one of those teams is really, jumping at the bit right now to be, trading for Bryce Young and kind of bring him in. I think if they need a, developmental prospect, they can probably take one, later in the draft next year. So it's a tough situation of where, Young and the Panthers are going to be trying to figure out how to move forward.
Definitely going to be interesting. Dan Pizzuta, 33rd Team with us here on the Hoffman Show. So we see, meanwhile, with the young quarterback playing, as well as any of the young quarterbacks in this rookie class here in D.C. with Jayden Daniels, they get their first win on Sunday over the Giants. And I think there has been a little bit of frustration amongst national folks and certainly even amongst local fans about not opening up the offense more. We know Jayden's a great deep ball thrower. I can certainly point to some reasons why I think that's happening, and I don't even mind it, especially when you get a win like they did on Sunday. But when you watch them and Cliff try to walk that line of letting Jayden do some of the things that we know he's great at vertically down the field, and also making sure that he's protected in the short term and they're getting the ball out of his hands and all that kind of stuff, how do you think that they're managing him so far through 2 games, and what have you seen in terms of growth or change in that from game 1 to game 2?
Yeah, it certainly is a bit frustrating when you are looking at it from the outside. I think there's, we talked about this earlier, where there's still kind of the PTSD a little bit of watching the Cliff Kingsbury offense that we saw was very horizontal at times in Arizona, especially when you had a guy like Kyler Murray who could also, throw deep. So it's a lot of, the screens and the flats, and that is kind of frustrating to see a little bit over the stretch. But, I do think they are kind of starting to open things up a little bit. I think my hesitation right now with the offense, and, Jayden Daniels has been a great scrambler, and that's kind of how they have gotten most of their big plays so far, is when Daniels is getting out of the pocket, he's able to run, and those have been very positive plays. The interesting thing, though, is and it's kind of my hesitation on Daniels as a player kind of going back through college, when he gets out of the pocket, he is looking to run. He is not one of these guys that is kind of keeping his eyes downfield and looking for something to open up further down the field. I shared something on Twitter, I think the other day. Jayden Daniels right now has the 3rd most plays that have ended outside the pocket, but has the 3rd fewest pass attempts. And that is something, it has been working so far to be a positive. But if that offense is going to open up and Jayden Daniels is going to be one of these guys who can, create plays outside of structure, I think kind of that the passing game needs to be working when he is on the run. And he's someone who's just been very hesitant to do that so far. And again, it hasn't been a detriment to the offense yet, but I think that is something that I would like to see them work on and be something that they do focus on. I think there was a play to, Zach Ertz that ended up later in the second half against the Giants. And that's kind of what you want to see. He gets out of the pocket, is able to see something happen, develop down the field, and he gets a big open play. So those are the things I would kind of like to see going forward in the offense, because I think structurally, those plays in structure, they are eventually going to open up a little bit more. But for this offense to really, I think, get its full potential, you kind of want to see Jayden Daniels make some of these throws on the run like he should be able to do with his athleticism and his arm.
That is such a great call, and that stat is really astounding. The 3rd most plays ending outside the pocket, 3rd fewest throws. Now, if you didn't mention it, I was going to, that play to Ertz, and if he can do that more often, that's great. I think the other part of that, I'll shout out my pal Mark Bullock, who does a great job with his Substack and the film breakdowns. Mark highlighted a play the other day where if Jayden, it's a red zone play, and it should have been a touchdown to Terry McLaurin. They got the coverage look they wanted, but there was a little bit of pressure, and Jayden took off and tried to scramble. I think he winds up throwing the ball away or maybe even taking a sack kind of at the line of scrimmage. But if he has, instead of taking off running, he just sidesteps in the pocket, takes a step up, resets his feet, it's an easy touchdown. So that ability to not drop his eyes and watch what's going on downfield and make those plays, I think is a great shot by you. If, especially since, Dan, the Commanders fans don't have a game to watch on Sunday because they're playing on Monday night this week, who are the quarterbacks that you think do that the best in the league? That if fans are like, hey, quit yelling about our guy. Okay, fine. What are you talking about? Who are the guys that do that the absolute best in the league that people can watch on Sunday and see examples of that?
Yeah, I think you have, the mobile guys like, Josh Allen obviously is going to be up there. He kind of is one of those guys who can, when he is outside of the pocket, probably makes decisions that most quarterbacks probably shouldn't. But he is always kind of looking for something to happen downfield. I think that he had a throw on Thursday night that ended up being a deep throw to the running back when he was out of the pocket. There was like an easy throw that he could have made that would have just been a first down. But he has whatever's going on in Josh Allen's brain. It's just like, no, I should probably throw to this running back. He's now running deep down the field. So he ends up doing that. But Kyler is great at this also. He is one of these guys who is a scrambler, but he is also always looking to throw down the field. I think Lamar is similar. When he does have the opportunity to throw, I think Baltimore's offense is kind of not what we had hoped it might have been, coming into the season, coming off last season with the offensive coordinator change. But these are still guys that are looking to throw first when they're on the run and then take off and pass the line of scrimmage once that's kind of their last option. So I think when you have like those mobile quarterbacks like that, like those are the kind of guys that you would kind of hope Jayden ends up playing more like, at least, with his creativity outside the pocket going forward.
Yeah, obviously you throw Mahomes in that bucket as well, because if there's anything a quarterback can do, and it's good, Patrick Mahomes goes in the bucket. Dan Pizzuta with us here on the Hoffman Show. One more thing I wanted to touch on with you, Dan, is on the defensive side. Obviously, there's been a lot of disappointment with the production from John Allen and Daron Payne. Supposedly excellent players who combined last weekend for 2 tackles total. Both of them were by Allen. Payne had nothing. So is it just too easy, like as you watch other teams around the league that have defensive tackle or defensive tackles as kind of the centerpieces as opposed to really talented, highly compensated edge players, is it a disadvantage to have your defense built from the inside out that way because of what offenses can do, double teaming them in some of the positions they find themselves in versus a guy who plays in a little bit more space?
Yeah, I think it depends. I think it depends on, especially one, how good those interior defensive players are. The Rams built an entire defense around Aaron Donald being great and destroying guards inside. The same thing I think is true with the Chiefs and Chris Jones. I think with Washington right now, I think it is easy kind of to focus on the interior of that defensive line and make sure that is not really causing havoc, because you still kind of have questions on what is happening on the edge. And I think Washington does make it a little easier to do that because, one, they don't really have the edge presence that would make teams kind of worry. And the way I think they're going about some of their pass rush things, when they are trying to, disguise what they're doing on defense, a lot of it is in the back end. I think they have one of the highest rates of disguise coverages, whether they're going from a single high safety to too high or too high to single high. They're not doing a lot of that around the line of scrimmage, which I think we were seeing a lot of these, new age defenses kind of do right now. Seattle's doing a lot of that. New England's doing a lot of that, where you're either, using, you're putting 5 or 6 guys around the line of scrimmage, and you don't know exactly which 4 guys are going to rush. So Washington's trying to blitz a lot to create that, but they're not really disguising it. They're trying to use a lot of stunts, but then they don't have the coverage to hold up. So by the time those stunts are happening, the ball's out and the coverage has already kind of been picked apart. So there's just a lot of moving pieces right now that I think it is hard for one individual, especially or 2 individuals on that interior defensive line, to really they need to be blowing past guards, I think, right off the snap in order for them to be making the type of impact you would hope. And that's a really hard thing to ask of a player like that.
Right, and then they've done that some, and then New York, thinking about Dable and Buffalo, but New York and Tampa have done a really good job being like, okay, cool, you want to blow off the line of scrimmage? We'll run draw right by you, and thanks for taking yourself out of the play. Now we don't have to worry about you, or we're gonna hit you with a wham or a trap, and that's gotten them on some bigger run plays. So hopefully it'll come together quickly, Dan. Otherwise, we're going to just ask a bunch of questions about sad defense all year, and we've done that for too many years here, frankly. So I think we've earned a change. Is basically what I'm telling you, Dan.
Yeah, you would think. I mean, at least I think it is. Again, like we kind of talked about, I think the first time, it's not miscommunication which isn't working, which I think is a little bit of more optimism, right? Maybe it's not quite as optimistic if the talent just isn't there. But I think structurally, they mostly know what they're doing. You just kind of hope that everything comes together and the execution just comes together a bit more as we go forward.
Yeah, definitely. And the more reps they have together, theoretically, it gets better. But we'll see. Certainly a different kind of challenge Monday night against Cincinnati. Dan Pizzuta writing about everything NFL-wide at the 33rd team. Dan, really great stuff again, and we will talk to you next Thursday. Thank you.
All right, great. Sounds good. Thanks. Appreciate it.
That is Dan Pizzuta, everybody, with us here on The Hoffman Show.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.